Welcome to LexTalks Legal Topics Simplified.
Yeah.
Today we're going deep into the Indian Constitution.
Okay.
And as law students in India, this is going to be a pretty important document for you as you move forward.
Oh, absolutely.
So we've got some great articles and excerpts to kind of guide our deep dive,
Awesome.
focusing on the structure of the Indian government and what makes this document unique.
You know, one of the things that always strikes me is how the Indian Constitution, it's not just borrowing from other systems.
Yeah.
It's really creating this unique blend, this
Yeah.
hybrid that's both familiar and distinct at the same time.
Right. It's not just a copy-paste job, is it?
No.
And when we look at our sources, we see how it lays out these three branches of government.
Mm-hmm.
The legislature, the executive, and the judiciary,
Right.
each with its own, role to play.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really the specifics that make it fascinating.
Absolutely.
So starting with the legislature, we've got the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha.
Right.
And this is where things get done. This is where laws are shaped, debated, passed.
Yeah.
It's the heart of India's democracy in action.
Absolutely.
Then we move over to the executive branch, led by the president and prime minister, and they're the ones putting those laws into practice.
Yep. Yep.
Making the decisions, implementing policies, translating what's on paper into the real world.
And then you've got the judiciary.
Yes.
Keeping everyone in check with the Supreme Court at the top.
Right.
It's their job to make sure everything's running according to the Constitution,
Yeah.
protecting citizens' rights and just, keeping things fair.
Making sure no one steps out of line.
Yeah.
Now, this division of power, we see this in a lot of democratic systems, right?
For sure.
That whole checks and balances idea.
Exactly.
But what gets even more interesting is how the Indian Constitution tackles the fact that India is huge
Yeah.
and so diverse.
A massive, diverse country. Exactly.
And that's where the quasi-federal system comes into play.
That term keeps popping up, doesn't it?
It does.
Federal in form, but unitary in spirit, as they say. Yeah.
It's like this balancing act
Yeah.
between national unity and giving states the power to, manage their own affairs.
Right. Like a tightrope walk.
Exactly.
So in practice, where does the power actually lie?
Well, states have a lot of authority, especially in areas like, public health, keeping order, taxes.
Right.
But the central government, they get the final say in the really big stuff.
What kind of big stuff are we talking about?
We're talking national defense, foreign relations, regulating trade between states.
The big picture stuff.
The big picture stuff.
So it's about making sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to those big issues.
Right.
But states still have a lot of say in what happens closer to home.
Absolutely.
And this balance, it's not just some abstract idea. We see it in how the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of parliament, is set up.
Yeah.
States have representation there based on their population.
Right.
So it's not just the central government calling all the shots. Exactly. It's about making sure that the concerns and needs of different states are actually taken into account when, they're making laws that affect the whole country.
Like a built-in system to make sure everyone's voice is heard.
Exactly. Think of it this way. The Rajya Sabha can actually act as a brake on the Lok Sabha,
Oh.
making sure national policies don't end up, putting certain states at a disadvantage.
So it's not just about structures and power dynamics. It's also about values. And that starts with the preamble.
Yeah, the preamble.
Almost like a mission statement, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It declares India a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic.
Right.
It lays out these big goals: justice, liberty, equality, fraternity for all citizens. And these aren't just, nice-sounding words. They're the bedrock of judicial review.
They have real teeth.
They have real teeth.
And we see that in landmark cases like Keshavananda Parade. That's mentioned in one of our sources. That case from 1973, it shows how these values in the preamble, they directly impact how courts interpret and apply the law.
Absolutely.
It's not just theoretical.
It's a guiding light for the judiciary.
And then you've got the fundamental rights
Right.
explicitly listed. These are the essential rights every citizen is entitled to. And then there are the directive principles of state policy.
Yeah.
They're not legally enforceable,
Right.
but they guide the government towards policies that benefit the people. And one source pointed out, we've also got fundamental duties.
Oh, yeah, those were added later, right?
Added later.
Emphasizing citizens' responsibilities to the nation.
And what's fascinating about all of this is how it shows how India's legal and social landscape has evolved.
Absolutely. And for you guys as law students, Grasping these nuances is crucial for interpreting laws,
Yeah.
understanding the legal issues you'll face in your careers.
It's like a behind-the-scenes look at how the legal system works, Understanding the intentions and the values that shape those laws.
And it brings us to another interesting aspect that kind of sets India apart, and that's the single citizenship system.
Right. Unlike some countries where you have separate citizenships at the state and national level, India grants a single citizenship to all its people. Doesn't matter which state they're from.
It's a powerful statement, right?
It is.
Saying that national unity goes hand in hand with all of India's amazing diversity.
And speaking of unity, our sources also touch upon the debates surrounding sovereignty.
Oh, yeah.
Article 1 of the Constitution clearly states that India is a union of states.
Right.
So it addresses that question. Do states have the right to secede? And by defining India as a union, the Constitution really emphasizes its indivisibility.
It's saying, look, while states have their own identities and roles, ultimately they're part of this single unified nation.
So let's talk about the Constitution's structure and the whole amendment process.
Yeah.
One source highlighted the fact that the Indian Constitution is the most frequently amended national governing document globally.
Which, on the surface, that might seem kind of surprising.
It does. But there's a reason for that.
There is.
It's not like changes are made lightly. There's a supermajority requirement.
Oh, yeah.
Any amendments need a 2/3 majority in both houses of parliament.
Right. That's huge.
It's huge. So it's about respecting the Constitution's foundational role and recognizing that changing it requires careful thought and it needs widespread agreement.
You can't just, change it on a whim.
Now, one of the things I found really interesting
Yeah.
was that the Indian Constitution has been translated into several regional languages.
Oh, wow.
Bengali and Maithili, we actually have excerpts from those translations.
That's incredible.
It's a powerful initiative, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Making the Constitution accessible in multiple languages, it removes barriers.
Right.
And it really shows this commitment to inclusivity.
It does.
It ensures that people can understand their rights and the principles that govern their nation in their own languages.
It's about making the Constitution a living document that resonates with everyone, regardless of their background.
It's bringing it closer to the people.
Now, the Constitution, it didn't just magically appear.
Oh, definitely not. It emerged from this really complex historical process.
And our sources shed light on some pretty fascinating details about that.
Oh, for sure.
One source mentioned discussions about a constitution for India starting as early as 1928.
Wow.
That's even before independence.
That's incredible foresight. The All Parties Conference actually formed a committee in Lucknow to draft a constitution. And it became known as the Nehru Report.
The Nehru Report.
So it really shows that the desire for self-determination and a homegrown constitution, it was there long before India actually gained independence.
It's like planting the seeds for a future that was still years away. And then, of course, from 1947 to 1950, India was a dominion of the United Kingdom.
Right, technically independent, but still tied to the British crown. During that transition period, they continued applying existing British legislation, and there was this big push to integrate the princely states into India.
So it wasn't just an overnight shift, but more of a carefully managed process.
Exactly.
And then we get the Constituent Assembly.
Yeah.
This body was elected by members of provincial assemblies.
Right.
And they had this huge job of drafting the final constitution.
It's amazing to think about all those discussions and debates, the weight of responsibility they had.
One of our sources actually has this quote from T.T. Krishnamacharya, a member of the drafting committee.
Oh, wow.
He talks about just the sheer volume of work and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's dedication.
Ambedkar being the chairman of the drafting committee.
Exactly. It really humanizes the whole process. It reminds us that there were real people behind this historic document with their own perspectives and experiences, working tirelessly to shape the future of a nation.
And, Krishnamacharya also mentioned how several members of the drafting committee couldn't fully participate for various reasons, leaving this huge burden on Dr. Ambedkar's shoulders.
Which really highlights the challenges involved in such a huge task.
Absolutely. And the Assembly's work, it was incredibly thorough. They meticulously reviewed thousands of amendments, discussing, debating, and ultimately disposing of 2,473 out of a total of 7,635.
So they weren't just rubber stamping things.
No, they were really shaping the Constitution,
Yeah.
carefully considering every aspect.
The timeline itself is fascinating.
It is. One source lays it all out.
And it's amazing how quickly things moved. The Constituent Assembly was formed in December 1946,
Okay.
holding its first meeting in what's now the Central Hall of Parliament House. The Muslim League, advocating for a separate state, they boycotted this first meeting.
Right.
But within days, they elected Rajendra Prasad as president, H.C. Mukherjee as vice president, and B.N. Rao as constitutional legal advisor. And just a few weeks later, Jawaharlal Nehru presented the objective resolution outlining the guiding principles for the Constitution. They hit the ground running.
They didn't waste any time. And that objective resolution, that eventually became the preamble we talked about earlier.
It did.
Yeah.
It's incredible to see how these core ideas took shape so early on.
It is.
Then came independence, August 15th, 1947.
A pivotal moment.
Redrew the map of the subcontinent,
Yeah.
with India and Pakistan becoming separate dominions.
Yeah. And less than a month later, the drafting committee, headed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, was appointed.
And their job,
Yeah.
to take all of those discussions, resolutions, debates,
Yeah.
and turn them into the actual text of the
A
Constitution.
monumental task.
And it's worth noting that on July 16th, 1948, V.T. Krishnamachari, the same guy we quoted earlier,
Right.
he was elected as the second vice president of the Constituent Assembly, alongside Harendra Kumar Mukherjee.
So he was right there in the thick of it, witnessing those debates and decisions firsthand.
And after years of meticulous work, countless deliberations, the Indian Constitution was adopted on November 26, 1949.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the sense of accomplishment?
Yeah.
And just the weight of history in that moment.
It must have been incredible.
The last meeting of the Constituent Assembly took place on January 24th, 1950.
Okay.
The Constitution, with its 395 articles,
Wow.
8 schedules, 22 parts.
Yeah.
It was signed, accepted.
And just 2 days later, January 26th, 1950, it came into effect.
It's amazing
Yeah.
to think this complex document with all its nuances
Yeah.
was drafted and implemented in just under 3 years.
A testament to their dedication and vision.
It wasn't just about legalities and technicalities. It was about forging a new nation, one founded on democracy,
Yeah.
justice, and equality.
Laying the groundwork for a system of governance that aimed to empower citizens, safeguard their rights.
And as we've seen with the numerous amendments over the years, it's a system that continues to evolve.
That's an important point.
It's not static.
It's a living text.
That
Adapts to the changing needs and aspirations of the nation.
And that adaptability
Right.
is balanced with the need for stability and continuity, which we see in the supermajority requirement for amendment.
Absolutely. Making sure that any changes are made carefully and with broad consensus.
Now, let's zoom in on some key aspects of the Indian government's structure as laid out in the Constitution.
Okay.
We touched on the 3 branches of government, but let's unpack how they actually function in practice.
Yeah.
Their specific powers and responsibilities.
That's key to understanding how things work.
It is. And our sources give us some great insights here. Let's start with the executive branch. We know it's headed by the president,
Yeah.
but what's their actual role?
Well, according to Articles 52 and 53 of the Constitution, the President of India is the head of the executive branch. And Article 60 outlines their duty, which is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and the law.
That sounds like a pretty big deal.
It is, in theory, but in practice,
Yeah.
the president's role is largely ceremonial. The real executive power lies with the prime minister and the council of ministers.
Oh, so it's similar to, like, the British system,
Yeah.
where you have the monarch as the head of state,
Right.
but the prime minister is actually running the show.
Exactly. Article 74 of the Constitution states that the Prime Minister heads the Council of Ministers, which aids and advises the President in carrying out their duties.
So even though the president has the formal authority, it's really the prime minister calling the shots.
In practice, yes. And Article 75(3) makes it clear that the Council of Ministers is answerable to the Lok Sabha, the lower house of Parliament, meaning they're accountable to the people's elected representatives.
Right.
Which really solidifies the prime minister's role as the head of government.
So the president is like a symbol of the nation's unity, while the prime minister and their cabinet are the ones dealing with the everyday business of governing.
That's a good way to put it. The president's role is still vital, upholding the Constitution, making sure the government functions smoothly.
Right.
But when it comes to policymaking and implementation, that's the prime minister's domain.
Now, let's talk about the legislature.
Okay.
We know it's bicameral.
Right, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha.
But how do they actually work together when it comes to making laws?
Well, the Lok Sabha, the House of the People,
Hmm.
it's the lower house, directly elected by the people.
Right.
It's where most bills originate.
So that's the house that most directly reflects the will of the people.
Exactly. And that gives it, significant power in the legislative process. But the Rajya Sabha, or Council of States, it acts as a really important check on the Lok Sabha's power,
Right.
representing the interests of states and making sure their views are considered in national legislation.
Which, we talked about earlier, helps balance the interests of the central government and the states.
Absolutely. For a bill to become law,
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be passed by both houses of parliament. This means the Lok Sabha, even though they have that direct mandate from the people,
Yeah.
they can't just force legislation through without considering the Rajya Sabha's perspective.
So it's a system that encourages dialogue, compromise,
Absolutely.
and it makes sure that laws are thoroughly considered and represent all those diverse interests within the nation.
Right. The bicameral system with its checks and balances.
Mhm.
It's a vital part of how India's democracy functions.
And it's worth noting that there's no provision for a joint session of the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha when it comes to constitutional amendments.
That's a big one. Unlike ordinary bills, which can be resolved through a joint session if there's a disagreement, constitutional amendments need that two-thirds majority in both houses independently.
Wow.
So, you see, the Rajya Sabha is super important when it comes to safeguarding the Constitution,
Yeah.
making sure any changes truly reflect a broad consensus.
It really shows you how seriously they take amending the Constitution.
Oh, yeah.
Careful thought, agreement from both houses, reflecting both the people and the states.
It's a big deal.
It is. Now, another interesting thing about this legislative process I found,
Yeah.
during a parliamentary recess, the president can't just use their legislative powers and issue ordinances.
Right. That's a crucial limitation, and it's outlined in Article 123, Chapter 3.
Mhm.
Even in emergencies, you have to respect the process.
Yeah.
Parliament's authority is key.
It's another one of those checks and balances, right?
Exactly.
Making sure the president can't bypass the legislature, even when things are tough.
Upholding that separation of powers means the legislative function stays with the elected representatives.
Right.
And this kind of leads to another interesting thing about the president's role. Okay.
One source pointed out this difference between, de jure and de facto exercise of executive power.
Okay.
So the Constitution says the president holds all this power, but in reality, they rarely exercise it independently.
So it's like what's written down versus what actually happens.
Exactly. De jure authority, meaning like the legal right, but the de facto power, the actual control, that's with the prime minister and the council of ministers.
So the president's more like a figurehead while the prime minister's really steering the ship.
That's a great way to put it. And the Constitution actually states this explicitly. The president has to act on the, quote, aid and advice of the council of ministers.
Right, which is led by the prime minister.
Yep. So in practice, the president's role is more symbolic, with the prime minister wielding that real power.
So they basically have to go along with the prime minister's decisions.
For the most part, yes. It's influenced by that British model, which India, of course, adopted during its colonial period.
Right.
But it's not like the president is completely powerless. Right, because one source mentioned they can ask the Council of Ministers to reconsider their advice. They can even make public statements explaining their reasoning.
Exactly. So they do have some sway over public opinion.
So it's more nuanced than it might seem at first glance.
Right.
It's not just a rubber stamp.
Oh.
There's room for the president to have an impact,
Yeah.
even if it's more behind the scenes.
Exactly. They can raise concerns, spark public debate,
Right.
and maybe even nudge the council towards different viewpoints.
It's about more than just saying yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about federalism in the Indian context.
Okay.
Our sources keep mentioning quasi-federal,
Yeah.
federal in form, but unitary in spirit.
Right.
What does that actually mean in practice?
Mm.
How's power divided between the central government and the states?
Now, this is where things get really interesting. The Indian Constitution, as we've been talking about, it blends those federal and unitary features in a way that's, very unique.
Right. And Article 1 is very clear. India is a union of states,
Yeah.
emphasizing national unity, indivisibility. We talked about that earlier.
Absolutely. So states keep important powers.
Yeah.
They've got a strong voice through the Rajya Sabha, right? But the Constitution also puts some limits on their authority
Right.
and gives the central government that final say in lots of matters.
There's that balancing act again,
Exactly.
ensuring the nation sticks together while still giving states some freedom to manage their own thing.
Right. Let's look at how this actually works. Some examples.
Okay.
Our sources highlight the Rajya Sabha's role, the upper house, representing those state interests.
Right. It acts like that federal chamber we talked about.
Yep.
Making sure states have a say on the national level.
And it's not just for show. The Rajya Sabha has to agree for a bill to become law.
Yeah.
And any changes to the Constitution need a 2/3 majority there. That gives states real power in shaping things.
It's like a safeguard built right in.
Exactly.
So the central government can't just ignore what the states want.
Exactly. The Rajya Sabha makes sure those concerns are heard before any big decisions are made.
Okay, so that's the Rajya Sabha. But states also have power in other ways, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Constitution lists powers that are specifically for states to handle.
Right. That's the state list, right?
Yep. It's in the 7th schedule of the Constitution, and it's pretty long.
It covers a lot.
Things like public health, keeping order, different taxes.
Ooh, that's stuff that affects people's daily lives.
Right. The police, healthcare, agriculture, elections. This way, states can create policies that fit their specific needs, recognizing that what works in one state might not work in another.
Makes sense. India is just so diverse. So lots of autonomy in running their internal affairs. But we talked about limits before. How do you stop states from going too far?
Well, along with that state list, the 7th schedule has 2 other lists, the union list and the concurrent list.
Okay, break those down for me. What's on the union list?
That's where the central government has exclusive control. States can't make laws on those matters.
So the stuff where you really need a unified national approach.
Exactly. Think national defense, foreign relations, immigration, banking, interstate commerce.
Right. You can't have states going off and creating their own armies or signing treaties.
Chaos.
Total chaos. And the concurrent list.
That's where it gets interesting. Both the central government and these state governments can make laws there.
Oh, so there's overlap.
Yeah, things like education, criminal law, forests.
So both parliament and state legislatures can pass laws on those things.
They can. But here's the catch. If a state law clashes with a central law, the central law wins.
It's like a hierarchy. The central law trumps the state law.
Exactly. It keeps things consistent and avoids contradictions on issues that affect the whole country.
So it's all about balance.
Balance. Local autonomy, national unity. It's how you govern a country as complex as India.
Yeah. The Constitution gets that you need both centralized authority and decentralized decision-making. Flexibility, adaptability, but always with that national unity in mind.
And you see this even more when you look at how the Constitution deals with finances.
Right. States have the power to levy certain taxes, but the central government also has a lot of financial control. One source even mentioned Articles 268 to 275, outlining how these taxing powers and financial resources are split up.
Exactly. Like Article 268, that's all about stamp duties. Central government levies them, but states collect and use the money.
So the central government creates the stamp duty, but the states get to keep the revenue.
Yep. It makes sure states have income, even though they don't have the power to create the tax itself. Then there's Article 269 about taxes levied and collected by the union but assigned to the states.
What kind of taxes are we talking about there?
Things like taxes on the sale or purchase of goods in interstate trade, taxes on stuff moving between states.
So it sounds like the Constitution is trying to find a way for states to have some financial independence.
Yeah.
But the central government still has the resources to take care of things on the national level.
Right, finding that sweet spot.
Exactly.
And Article 275 takes it a step further. Grants and aid from the central government to states that need a little help.
So if a state's struggling financially, the central government steps in.
Exactly. It's especially important for states with lower incomes or facing unique challenges.
Right. Maybe they have a large tribal population or regions that are less developed.
Yeah, the Constitution recognizes that some states need extra help to make sure development is fair and everyone has a good quality of life.
So it's acknowledging those economic differences and creating a system for cooperation and support.
Exactly. Indian federalism isn't just about dividing up the power.
Yeah.
It's about the union and the states working together.
It's more of a partnership.
Exactly. Everyone contributes, everyone supports each other. And this goes beyond just money. The Constitution also helps resolve disputes between the Union and the states, or even between states.
Well, yeah, just like in a family, right?
Exactly.
Disagreements happen.
They
You
do.
need a way to deal with them peacefully and fairly.
Right. Article 263, that allows for creating an interstate council. They investigate, advise on disputes, encouraging dialogue, finding solutions together.
Like a wise mediator.
Exactly. And if that doesn't work,
Yeah.
there's always the courts. The Supreme Court, they interpret the Constitution, settle those disputes.
Right. They're the final authority, making sure the principles of federalism are upheld. Justice is served.
Exactly. You really need to understand those nuances of the Constitution and how it resolves conflict.
Yeah.
Maintains that balance between unity and diversity. It's a complex document. It reflects India's history, its diversity, its goals for a just and equitable society.
It's been an incredible journey, exploring the structure, the guiding principles, how it's changed over time.
And for you, as law students in India,
Yeah.
understanding this Constitution, it's not just about passing exams.
Right.
It's about equipping yourselves to navigate the legal world. Advocate for your clients, and be part of shaping your nation's future.
It's about more than just memorizing facts.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning. The Constitution is your guide.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
It really is. And it's not just about, memorizing those articles and clauses. You need to get the spirit behind them, the history, the debates.
It's about seeing it as a living document.
Right.
Something that changes and adapts with society.
And recognizing that at its heart, it's about empowering you, the citizen, giving you rights, protecting your freedoms, setting the stage for a fair and just society.
So as you go through law school, remember, you're not just studying a subject. You're exploring the very foundation of India's democracy.
And it's a powerful tool for change. Understanding it, engaging with its principles, you can help shape a better future for yourselves and for India.
We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on the Indian Constitution.
Yeah.
And maybe sparked your curiosity to explore it even further.
It's been great diving into this with you.
It has. Keep those legal minds sharp, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive. Thank you for listening to the LexTalks podcast. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and stay notified on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode.